Fernandez. I am Chief of Staff to the University of Miami President, and I'm also the Vice President here at the University for Government Affairs and Community Relations. I've been at UM for 9 years. Before joining the University of Miami and coming back home here to South Florida, I had the privilege of serving in the George W. Bush White House. I was a special assistant to the President for intergovernmental affairs in the White House from 05 to 07. I spent 8 years in Washington, D.C. And in 05 and 06, while working at the White House, I had an opportunity to be part of the White House working group that tried unsuccessfully to tackle immigration reform during the second term of President Bush's time in office. So there's a lot of lessons that I've carried on to my job and my passion. This issue of immigration reform is a personal passion of mine. So I always say yes when good national leaders like my friend Ali Noorani ask me to host events. So welcome to Miami. I know that we have a late arriving crowd because of the number one, we're in Miami, so late arriving crowd is a norm. Anyone here will tell you that. And number two, obviously everybody stayed up and watched the debate last night, and I'm sure that has something to do with it. I have been asked to moderate the first panel, so I'll dive right into it. Because one of our sponsors for today, Jimmy Kemp, could not make the event and is under the weather. So I will do my best to sort of moderate this first panel. And as you can see in your program, the topic is an immigration system that serves American workers. Let me ask the three panelists that will sort of lead us in the discussion during this first hour to sit up here. We are very, very pleased to have Ken Barbick Sr., who's the Director of Federal Government Affairs for the Western Growers. Ken, why don't you wave so people don't confuse you with the archbishop? Then Julio Fuentes, President and CEO of the Florida State Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And then it's, as a member of the Archdiocese, I try to be a good practicing Catholic. It's always an honor to welcome to the University of Miami Archbishop Thomas Wensky from the Archdiocese of Miami. So thank you, Mr. Archbishop, for being here. Let me start by asking each of the panelists, and I'll defer to the Archbishop to sort of make some opening statements. Obviously, you understand that the topic during the first hour, how immigration affects American workers. And why don't you make some opening remarks?
Well, thank you. Well, I'm not an immigrant. My father was an immigrant, but I spent most of my life working with immigrants here in South Florida with Hispanics, Cubans, Mexicans, and for 18 years I was the parish priest of the Haitian community here in South Florida. I think one of the realities that we see is that immigrants have found where work is in the United States. Before the 90s, immigration was only a reality in about 6 states. Now it's a reality in all 50 states. And these people have migrated to different parts of the country, picking onions in upstate New York, apples in Vermont, even working in Alaska. And they were, quote unquote, resettled there, not by any federal agency, nor by any strategic plan. They kind of found where the work was, and they worked. And they went where there was work. In other words, if there wasn't work drawing the immigrants here, there wouldn't be immigrants, because people do not come to the United States to sleep under a bridge, and the immigrants generally are not sleeping under bridges. They come to work. And one of the things about the immigrant, I would say, is that what an American worker might consider to be a dead-end job is, for an immigrant, an entry-level job. And this has repeated itself across the country in various ethnic groups or immigrant groups. So, Cuban refugees came and they worked as busboys. That was an entry-level job. Haitians did the same, and they're working in hotels, et cetera, et cetera. Entry-level jobs for the immigrant. The American worker would see that as a dead-end job. And if you think about it, if you're an American, and say you're 30, 35 years old, and you grew up in this country, you went to school in this country, and at 30, 35 years old, all you're doing is sweeping floors or bussing tables, you're more than likely going to be doing that when you're 45. And so for an American, that job might well be an entry level, a dead-end job. And why? Perhaps high school dropout, perhaps some trouble with drugs, or some other issues that made that this person that was grown and grew up in the United States did not get the tools or the skills necessary to get beyond a job sweeping floors at 35 years old. Now, a Cuban balsero or a Haitian boat person can get off the boat and he gets that same job and he says, I got my foot in the door. This is my start. Now, you think of the difference in the psychology of that worker. Between the 35-year-old American that says I'm in a dead-end job and that 35-year-old immigrant that says, I got my foot in the door. This is my first step in the American dream. Now, who does the employer want to hire? Which attitude do you think he would like to reward? And who do you think will have less absenteeism? Who you think will show up on time for work? The immigrant. So this is one of the real realities that I think show the reasons why immigrants do succeed when they can succeed, and when they're not held down by not having legal status or other issues.
Thank you. Julio Fuentes?
Thank you, and thank you for having me here today. And I'll touch briefly on, I wear two hats, obviously, as I'm president, CEO of the Florida State Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I am also president of an organization called Hispanic Council for Reform and Educational Options, that delves in the world of education reform and the lack of our Latino students graduating, K through 12, or going on to, getting a college degree. And it's such an important issue because, without a doubt, education and the economy go hand in hand. We today have a shortage of qualified workers or students that are in the STEM industry that report after report shows that this is the future, right? We need to educate our kids in this arena. And today we have quite a few students from other countries that come and actually work hard and study and get their degrees and could really serve to our economy. But unfortunately, our broken system right now sends them off. We give them a degree as well as a ticket to go back to wherever country they went to, or whatever other country does have a friendly immigration system for them to go and contribute their talents in that area. And that's a serious issue that we really need to discuss and push more on. For example, we have a member up in West Palm Beach, Riviera Beach actually, that along the intercoastal there, Viking Yacht Club and Lockheed Martin, and there's about 4 or 5 other in the marine industry that have such a shortage of workers, and they see this as a huge problem today and just as big as a problem in the future, that they are literally investing in the community. They're building housing, affordable housing. They actually opened up 2 charter schools that are focused primarily in the maritime industry, with the hopes that these kids obviously not only have these and families have a place to live, a place to go to school, and then, of course, a qualified job once they do graduate. So when we talk about this topic here, it's an important one in our country. It's an important one for our state, and we need to just keep pushing for the proper policies to be put in place.
Thank you. Ken?
My name is Ken Barbick. I am with the Western Growers Association. Our association represents fruit, vegetable, tree nut growers, packers, and shippers. Our members are based in California, Arizona, and Colorado. But there's also a lot of overlap with the state of Florida. A lot of our members have operations here. We work very closely with the Florida partners in terms of the fresh produce industry. The immigration issue has been one that we have been deeply engaged with for some time now. In the agriculture sector, you see over 1.5 million farm workers. And we self-admit that somewhere between 50 and 70% of those farm workers are likely falsely documented. Many of these workers are immigrants. Many of them come from other places. As the archbishop highlighted, many of these people come here to make a better living for themselves and for their families. So they are not only important to the economic viability of our operations, of our farms, but we also care about them as members of our community and members of our businesses, and we want to see them flourish. We want to see them bettered as a result. We see that the impact of this issue is not just one for us in agriculture, not one that just touches our farms and our communities, but we see that other jobs are created as a result of immigrants working here. So while you've seen a lot in the political debate about immigrants taking jobs and being bad for the U.S. economy, that's actually the opposite of true. I mean, in the ag sector alone, you see that 2 to 3 jobs are created downstream for every job that takes place in agriculture. So by having these individuals here on our farms working, helping our businesses succeed, we actually see the broader economy also bolstered as a result of that. You also see, I think you've heard some of this, but the idea of folks wanting a better life. We've seen many examples of this. People coming to pick strawberries, and next thing you know, they actually own a farm. They move up in operations. I can point to many examples of places that I visited where I've talked to people where either they were a farm worker once themselves or their parent was, and now they're in senior management at a major operation. Well, that's what the American dream is all about, is people coming, wanting a better life for themselves and for their family members. Each of us can share similar stories about how that's been the case either for ourselves or for our ancestors coming and allowing us to have a better life today. So that's what we really want to see in our sector and across the economy.
Thank you, Ken. I'm going to ask an initial question to get us started. And then, since we're an intimate group, I want to make sure that I encourage audience participation. Ken, picking up on the issue that's been central during this election cycle, because I think everyone, regardless of where you lie on the political spectrum and what candidate you're supporting, it's fair to say that the immigration issue has been front and center. It's probably the hottest issue in the campaign. And you alluded to one of the central accusations or claims that immigrants, particularly undocumented immigrants, are taking American jobs. That if not for that undocumented immigrant that's picking tomatoes in Homestead or picking strawberries in your neck of the woods, an American would have that job. Can you expand on that and speak to that? Why? I mean, if 11 million undocumented immigrants left tomorrow, right? And Donald Trump has promised on his immigration speech a few weeks ago that during the first hour of his administration, he would begin to sort of round up and deport these people. Would those jobs be available? Are those jobs that Americans would take?
Yeah, so that's a complex question in terms of what the different factors are that are involved. So let me answer that a few different ways. First, in terms of jobs being available to Americans, anyone can go out and work in a field today if they want to. So if you want to go volunteer to pick strawberries and take that job, you are more than welcome to go out and do that. The facts bear out that Americans are not doing that, by and large. We've seen tremendous growth in the visa program that agriculture is able to utilize. It's a very bureaucratic program. It's a very cumbersome program. The H-2A program. We've seen that program double in usage in the last 5 years. Well, why are growers turning to that kind of program? Well, they're turning to that because...
Despite the fact that it's very cumbersome and there's a lot of regulation and it's painful for the growers, they're turning to the program.
Despite the fact that it's very difficult for the grower, they're turning to that program because there's not workers available to come out. There have been various campaigns. One of the more prominent campaigns was one of the UFW, so the United Farm Workers, put on a couple years ago, Take Our Jobs campaign. They literally asked people to come out and apply and try to work in farm jobs. And almost no one showed up. There was, I think, over 5,000 or 6,000 people that applied. A couple hundred people actually kind of went forward with the process. And it was a handful of people that actually showed up and worked for more than a day in the fields. We've seen other examples of that, where there are opportunities and people are not coming forward to take jobs in agriculture, in spite of the fact that when you look at agriculture positions compared to other positions, even at the lower end of the economy, those jobs pay better in many cases. There's many times where there are jobs working in the fields where you can make more money per hour than if you were to go work in a restaurant or in a hospitality job. But it's seasonal, it's difficult, and there's just a lot of people who are not interested in that kind of work for whatever reason.
The Western growers represents how many growers? Just educate us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so our membership represents about 60 to 65% of the domestic production of fresh fruits and vegetables in this country.
Okay, and roughly how many workers?
Workers overall, I mean, roughly I would say, probably about 1 million of the workers in this country.
Okay. Archbishop Fuentes, you want to weigh in on this question?
Yeah, last summer of 2015, there was a backlog in the bureaucratic process of processing those agricultural workers, the H2N program in Mexico, and you had thousands of workers in Mexico waiting to get into California, and the growers pushing the government to say, can't you break up this logjam because the margins are very thin. You have the vegetables won't wait. They have to be harvested at the right time, and bureaucracy can jeopardize the business success of growers. And if you don't have the workers here, then the growers will have to go there and plant there to where the workers are, and that would be the other unintended consequence. If you're talking about manufacturing jobs migrating out of the United States, what we're having here is at risk is the agricultural jobs migrating out of the United States as well.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent point that Archbishop just made. I mean, you have an internationally competitive economy, and there are opportunities to produce our food, and our food is going to be produced someplace. And either you allow for those opportunities here in the United States where there is great natural resources, there are great opportunities, and you allow people to come and work in those jobs, or you see that production move to countries where that human capital actually exists, which we've seen that happen in many areas of the agricultural sector over the years.
So growers are leaving. Growers are, when they don't get the workers that they need, they're leaving.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the ag sector as a whole, not to get into the trade debate, but we talk often about how in agriculture, U.S. agriculture exports significantly. Well, in the fresh produce industry, which is very labor intensive, we actually run a trade deficit. We're still in favor of trade. We still think trade is a good thing. But why is that? Well, it's because we haven't fixed our immigration system to allow us to take full advantage of the competitive advantages that our country has. If we had the ability to have that free flow of labor that was intended, then we would be able to take full advantage of some of those things, and we would see, I think, greater production in this country as a result of that.
And just to elaborate on what this particular discussion right now, and you touched on it when you had mentioned a lot of these workers are picking strawberries today, and tomorrow they might own their own, farm, factory, whatever the case may be. And that really is the case with Hispanic entrepreneurs. Today, a quarter of our state's small business owners are Hispanics. Nationally, we contribute well over $500 million to the U.S. Economy. So these are real, true numbers that have these stories that we hear of folks coming here for a better life, achieving that American dream. So I think these numbers and this reason for folks coming here to achieve that American dream could not be forgotten, and we need to keep that top of discussion.
Let me sort of pick up on something that Ken just referenced in terms of growers, and the Archbishop actually started the point in terms of growers potentially leaving the country. In a lot of industries, you don't want that happening for competitive reasons. But don't you think that there's a national security aspect to this country, allowing importing the vast majority of our food? We should sort of control our food supply domestically. Because a lot is also on the immigration debate. A lot is said about the anti-immigrant crowd tends to tie it to national security. Isn't this a national security issue as well?
Yeah, I would argue we've seen the results of dependence on foreign energy. And I don't think we want to see the same road gone down in terms of dependence for our food supply. And I would say, if you're here in South Florida, you probably have, a great understanding of the immigration system. You understand that everyone is touched by this. But one thing I would say to, a broader group is that you may not feel like the immigration issue touches you personally. But if you eat food, it does. Because either your food is being touched by the hands of immigrants here as it's being harvested or planted or picked, or it's being grown in another country so that it can be brought into this country. So I think that issue is a real issue. I think that you're going to always have some level of imports in terms of the food industry. You have different seasons in different parts of the world. But I don't think we would want as a country to be in a position where we increasingly see our food production shifted outside of the country when there's no reason for us to be in that position, honestly.
Let me open it up to questions from the audience. Yes. Yeah, go ahead. It's a small room.
Thanks very much. Hi, I'm Edward Allen from the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington. One of the issues that we've seen a lot in this campaign is the question of economic impact on American workers, whether from trade or from immigration, the sense that competition with low-wage workers in some ways is bad for Americans. A lot of that may well be a misunderstanding. There's probably some reality to it. My question, I guess, would be, are there ways to address that concern? I mean, on the high-skilled immigration side, for instance, Microsoft made a proposal 2 or 3 years ago where they said, look, we'll pay a higher fee for each worker. We'll pay $10,000 for each foreign skilled worker we get. We want that money to go into computer science training for Americans because there aren't enough computer science programs in high schools, and we actually have trouble finding Americans with the skills we need. Is there anything that can be done, you think, on the lower skilled side to try to address that concern and create programs that would sort of bring out the win-win aspects of this, that would invest in Americans even as the companies are benefiting from bringing in immigrant workers? Hard question.
Yeah, curveball there. Yeah, it's interesting. It's something that, if not already being looked into, I think it's something that's should be somewhat of a healthy discussion because, as you said, it's being done at a higher level, and if it's something that like minds could get together and agree on something, it would benefit them without doubt.
Well, another reality is that the only countries that have growing economies are countries that are open to immigration. That's the fact anywhere around the world. Countries that have no immigration have stagnant or shrinking economies. So there is a cause and effect there. And if you look at the United States, if it wasn't for immigrants, we would be experiencing something similar to what the Europeans experienced in Europe, what they called the demographic winter, because the birth rates for Americans are low. They would be lower if it wasn't for the new Americans that have come in, the first and second generation immigrants. So if you want a growing economy, you're going to have to open the door to greater immigration. This is also, we have an we have a reaction at this time. Everybody's, the world seems to be in a bad mood. So we're increasingly isolationist, increasingly restrictionist, and there's one other thing that we're increasingly anti-trade. And this was what the United States went through in 1920. In the 1920s, we were isolationists. We didn't want to get involved with the international order. We were restrictionists. We stopped immigration and pretty much dried it out for 2 generations until in the 60s. And also we were anti-trade. We had higher tariffs. That set up what what followed, the Great Depression and World War II. And it happened because of a reaction against globalization, the globalization of that time. As the 20th century began, the world was involved in a process of globalization because of steamships, because of telegraph, and because of migration. And there was a reaction then. We didn't call it terrorism, we call it anarchism. And an anarchist shot the great Duke of Sarajevo, and World War I started. So, when you look at what we're living through right now, there's a lot of parallels to 100 years ago. And if you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat it. But, globalization as a reality, we have the instant ability to move monetary instruments, across borders. We have the ability to move information in an instant across borders. The only thing that we cannot move with facility today is labor force. And a globalized world, requires all these factors to be working somewhat in sync. Now, does globalization have downturns? There's creative destruction in any type of, economy. And what you have to do is you have to plan for it. If you're, if the buggy whip makers are going out of business, you have to have training programs to train them to do something other than making buggy whips. And that's, I think, part of the frustration that a lot of people are feeling in the United States, because as the economy's changed, as we went from a manufacturing economy to an information-based economy, we didn't pay attention to train our schools, our school kids, to train our citizens for the next phase of the economy. And so we're experiencing a reaction as well.
Yeah, to that question, I won't speak to all the other areas of the economy, but just in the agriculture sector alone. First, ag workers are all making minimum wage or higher, which I think that seems like a straightforward thing. I think a lot of people are unaware of that. When I tell people that, they say, well, I thought they made less than that. Well, no, you can't do that. So that's first off. Second, there's a lot of commodities that when you look at harvest and whatnot, the rate is actually much higher than minimum wage. So I'll talk to growers in, berries out in California, tree fruit, vegetable crops, where, when they're harvesting, they're paying, over $15, sometimes upwards of $20 an hour for harvest work. And they still aren't able to always get the workers that they need. Well, why is that? Is that not enough money for those jobs? I think there's other factors going on for why people are not coming out to take those positions. Again, seasonality, difficulty of the work, some of those other things. I think another point in terms of the effect on other workers is, you can make that argument that others are being, disaffected, but if we don't have the workforce we need in agriculture, the impact across not just the ag sector, but broader communities is going to be impacted because of what the archbishop just said, which is the ability for capital to move. In agriculture, we're very sensitive to price and competitiveness issues. And it's a much easier thing in a competitive world economy to invest in a place where you have that labor source. So I think that's going to have a much bigger impact on other workers in the U.S. economy if you see operations increasingly moving to other countries where it's easier to be competitive in that way, which I think that's going to be the most significant negative effect on lower skilled Americans.
Let me comment on your question as well, because I thought it was an excellent one. It boils down to incentives. How do you incentivize, right, in the low skill sector, Americans to take that job picking berries in California? And I think that's very tricky when you're paying upwards of $20 an hour. You know, there is a limit to what you can pay a worker to pick berries and remain competitive in a market where you have a free market, and people are very price sensitive when they're buying groceries at the store. So I think that it's a question about incentives. It's easier, and I work in higher education, I work here at the university. It's easier for Microsoft to incentivize if you put forth enough scholarship money. Well, yeah, Americans are gonna say, wow, you know, there's scholarship money available for me to go into a STEM field. And I think at the high end, it's difficult, but it's easier than at the low end. I'll tell you this: at the University of Miami, you know, obviously every major research university is largely measured by your PhD and your grad students. Our PhD students here in STEM fields, 50% are international students, and it's a crime. I consider it a crime for us to have a broken system where we're investing in international students that are going to be creating the next Googles and the next Microsofts, and then, you know, because of our antiquated immigration laws, these people, you know, get PhDs. They want to stay here. They want to start companies here, and yet they go to Canada. Is very, very welcoming of this American PhD students, and so is China, and so is India, and so is Europe. I mean, in Europe, you're seeing, to the point that the archbishop mentioned about the birth rate here. In Europe, people are starting to fight for immigrant labor, right? Because, you know, they have an older population, and you need that sort of youth in the labor force in order to sort of keep the economy growing. So I think this whole question of incentives is very, very important. I have a bias. I believe in free markets, but I think this question is very important.
Immigration in the long run has more positives than negatives. And in fact, Miami, you know, is a bellwether for the rest of the country. You know, what we're experiencing here, although I do like to tell people that the best thing about Miami is that it's so close to the United States. But the reality is Miami is the United States, and it is the future of the United States. And, you know, people say, well, immigrants don't learn English. Well, you know, the Cubans have learned English. And they say that the immigrants don't integrate. You know, we have Cubans that are mayors. We have Haitians that are mayors and council presidents, state legislatures, et cetera. So, you know, the immigrant experience here in South Florida has shown that the United States still has this incredible ability to absorb immigrants, to integrate immigrants, and to allow them to prosper. And okay, their kids went to public school, and there was a cost to public schools, but you know, it's you know, we don't, when it's our kids and we're paying for their education, we don't consider that a cost. We consider it an investment. And I think we have to see that for other people's kids too, that it's an investment that will pay off dividends for all of us.
Next question, I saw a hand, yes.
So as an immigrant myself, I want to thank the Catholic Church and you personally for what you do for the immigrants. My question is, how does the Catholic Church reconcile their policy of welcoming immigrants with existing laws of rejecting immigrants?
With which laws?
Existing laws that reject immigrants.
Well, we've been calling for immigration reform for a long time. The U.S. bishops, myself, I've been working with immigrants all my life, but for the last 15, 16 years, we've been working on comprehensive immigration reform. I remember I and Bishop DiMarzio, who's the Bishop of Brooklyn, who's been a great advocate of immigrants, we went to see the then head of INS, guy that used to be the Sergeant of Arms in the House, Ziegler, who was appointed by George Bush as head of INS. I went to see him on a Monday evening with Bishop DiMarzio, and earlier that week, Vicente Fox had addressed the joint session of Congress, and Ziegler told us, he said, we're going to get immigration reform done within the year. So I left the immigration office, got on a plane, flew back to Miami. The next morning, I'm going to the office, and I see on my radio the World Trade Center go up in flames. And, since that point in time, there have been different immigration reforms. The best one, in my opinion, was the McCain-Kennedy bill. That was the best reform, partly because the staff of the U.S. Bishops' Conference helped the staff of Kennedy and McCain write the bill. That was the greatest bill that was out there at the time. As Trump would say, it was huge, but it didn't go anywhere. Unfortunately, a lot of political capital was lost during the Iraq War and everything like that. Then Martinez and Hagel tried it again, and it was not as good, but it was passable. Then we had the last iteration, the Gang of Eight with Marco Rubio, et cetera, which wasn't a great bill because it was going to basically keep immigrants from becoming U.S. citizens for about 13 years, which was fine with the congressmen that were passing the bill because they didn't think they would be in Congress after 13 years, so they didn't have to worry about these people voting against them. But that didn't go anywhere either. So we've been stymied year after year, but it still is very urgent because there are human beings being touched by it, and in my work we see these human beings all the time. When I was a young priest, and I'll shut up after this, I was ordained about 4 or 5 months, 25 years old, or 26 years old, Corpus Christi in Alapatha. So I'm this young guy, and this couple comes to see me. They're in their 40s or early 50s, and the guy and his wife from El Salvador. The wife is crying, the man is angry, and he says, Padre, and he's much older than me, he could be my father. He says, Padre, tell my wife she can't go home. And I'm crying, and I said, what's wrong? She's crying. She says, I just got word from El Salvador saying my mother is dying of cancer, and I want to go see her before she dies. And he says, Father, tell her she can't go home because if she goes home, she won't be able to come back. And if she goes home, her mother will die of starvation before she'll die of cancer because we're the ones that are keeping the family alive over there. That's the reality of millions of people in this country right now. Millions of people that live in the fear of a knock on the door in the middle of the night or a raid to their workplace. When I was growing up in the 50s, we used to have these stories in our civics classes about how in other countries, people lived in fear of the knock on the door, but we didn't have to do that because we lived in the United States. Well, millions of people live in fear of the knock at the door in this country. Immigration reform needs to be fixed. The people are not the problem. The inadequate, antiquated laws are the problem.
We got a question here.
Well, actually, just a comment. So there's a new report that just came out from the National Academy of Sciences, which was on the fiscal and economic consequences of immigration, and they showed that it's a net plus to have immigrants, and that, in fact, they really don't take that much from, from services, et cetera, and by their second generation, because their kids have gone to college and they're doing better, they're actually contributing even more to the economy. And the one line that I just wanted to say, it says between 2015 and 16, the estimated GDP growth due to contributions of immigrant workers amounted to nearly $2 trillion in the U.S. economy. And that's what we don't get reported.
Well, let me pick up on this particular point. It's excellent that you're citing that report, because as I said at the beginning of the panel, I was part of the Bush administration team that tried to pass the McCain-Kennedy bill, and we were unsuccessful. And I've been part of efforts nationally for the last 7 or 8 years pushing for immigration reform. And every poll that I've ever seen, and I think Rob Jesper will be part of the second panel, and he's seen a lot of these polls, shows that the majority of Americans, that silent majority, supports a sensible solution to this issue. Every major study backs up what this, fine lady has sort of cited here. And yet we're entering into this, I think The Economist had this cover a couple of weeks ago about we're entering into a world of post-truth, where truth and facts don't matter. You could have the best, you could have the National Academy of Science, publish a report that's evidence-based, that's factual, that's cited, that's properly reported on. You could have every major university and researcher in the country back at position on immigration or any other issue. And then you have, say, a presidential candidate say, well, I hear knowledgeable people that I talk to say that, Americans are losing jobs, because of the Western growers' position, right, on X. And people, a large portion of the electorate or enough people believe it or fall for that blog. I'm not going to pick on any particular blog, but Breitbart comes to mind. And then half of Americans sort of fall for it. How are we going to get past that is my question to you three wise gentlemen.
You raise an interesting point. I read that Economist piece as well. We don't have time to get into how disconcerting it is that our political dialogue is kind of at that point right now. But I think one thing that does highlight, and it's not just on this immigration issue. In agriculture, we face on a host of issues that we are engaged with. Making the complex argument for something that is reasoned, that has sound academic research behind it, economics behind it, that's not winning the debate in the public's mind. And those who are opposed to solutions have very short sound bites, and they have a compelling message in terms of a one-line kind of delivery. And I think for those of us who want to see immigration reform happen, we need to find better ways to communicate in those sort of venues. We need to be able to figure out better ways to deliver our message in simple ways, in ways that can stick in people's minds. I don't have the solution right now on that, but I think we need to do better work in terms of that. I think we need to continue emphasizing the facts and the research and everything else, and I think we have the upper hand in terms of those arguments. But in this climate where truth no longer seems to be winning the day, I think we do need to think about how we can have a more compelling story that's memorable to people in short kind of soundbite ways.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is not only a problem today, but it's scary for the future if this is the way that we're going to proceed moving forward. And from my standpoint and the Chamber of Commerce, not just here in Florida, but my colleagues throughout the country, we need to step it up, right? We always talk about mobilizing the base and working with grassroots. This is no longer just a grassroots issue. It's a grassroots, grass tops, and everything in between. And I think the messaging piece is also just as important. I'm no marketing guru, but it definitely, we need to figure that piece out because I don't think it's penetrating the way that we need for it to be penetrating. From a dollar and cent standpoint, that's real money. That's real money, to our U.S. economy. So yeah, I think we really need to step it up even more.
Yeah, I think we have to, again, make the human face visible. I always, like I said earlier, immigrants are not the problem. The immigration system that is broken is the problem. I hear a lot about people breaking laws. The broken immigration system has resulted in people not so much breaking the laws as being broken by the laws, being broken by the laws. And there's a lot of mythology, people taking our jobs, people using our resources, people threatening us, and why they don't stand in line, et cetera, et cetera. But if you talk to people and you explain to them, that the person that's taking care of their child, their nanny, or the person that's cutting their lawn is in this situation, then they might change their mind. They say, well, I know him and he's a good guy, or I know her and she's a good guy. You know, well, why can't he stand in a line like well, there's no line for him to stand in. Well, why not? Because the system doesn't provide for it. You know, I think that's the education that has to be made. This is also, you know, within the reality that America has always been ambivalent about immigrants or immigration, you know, throughout our history. So even when we had great waves of immigrants coming in, we also had reaction against immigrants, the Know Nothing movement of the 1840s and 1850s, the American First people of the 1920s, 1930s. So there's always been an ambivalence in America about immigration. And at this point, those that are anti-immigrants seem to shout loudest, and it's time for, you know, the rest of us to get our act together. And, you know, you would think that we have an unbeatable coalition. 20 years ago, immigration reform didn't have the cheerleaders that it has today. 20 years ago, you couldn't get the Chamber of Commerce and the labor unions to agree on this issue. Today, both the labor and business agree that we have to have immigration reform. So, you know, there's a wide basis for agreement. But gerrymandered congressional districts have an effect on why people in the House don't vote what the reality indicates they should vote for.
By the way, I asked the question, and of course, I've given a lot of thought to this question. I'll tell you, what polling, you know, it's true that what I said earlier is true. Every major poll tells you that the vast majority of Americans, including a majority of Republicans, support a sensible solution to this. What polls are not very good at measuring is the intensity of someone's position on an issue. And what you find is that the people that are against us, the Numbers USA and the folks that don't want to see immigration reform or want to see a hardline stance on immigration, this is their number one issue. They're absolutely passionate and very intense in their opposition to this, and they make it their number one priority, where oftentimes, and I'm, you know, a proud supporter of chambers in Florida and elsewhere, but oftentimes the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has been a great ally on this. But they have a lot of priorities before the Congress. You know, they have a lot of priorities before the Congress. We will win this, and it sort of goes back to, I think this is from The Godfather or some mafia movie, but it's the most committed person wins. The most in a political battle, it's the most committed side of the debate that wins. We will win. When people ask me, when is this finally going to happen? When the majority of Americans sort of make it a point that this is a priority. This is going to be one of our very top priorities. There's a couple more questions. Israel, I have had you waiting for a while.
Oh, it's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of picking up on that. I mean, as someone who's supportive of immigration reform, but also someone who has had the scars to prove it in terms of feeling like we're almost there and then it doesn't happen. I mean, tactically, I mean, is it difficult for us to continue pushing for comprehensive immigration reform if the votes are not there? I mean, does it make sense maybe to do this piecemeal and figure out like where there is a consensus instead of trying to get the big enchilada? I mean, are there things that you all would be comfortable supporting, saying, okay, well, this is like a down payment for future reforms, or are we going to just continue asking for comprehensive immigration reform, and that's where we draw the line in the sand?
You know, most of the immigration advocates wanted the comprehensive to keep the coalitions together because, you know, ag jobs bill would probably be an easy one to pass, but then if ag jobs bill gets passed, maybe others don't get passed. And so, you know, the advocates have been trying to keep the coalition together to get a comprehensive bill. But there has been boutique legislation in the past. NACARA in the 80s was boutique legislation that helped legalize Nicaraguans here. But we also tried a boutique legislation with the Dreamers Act, and we didn't get it, which shows you, you know, that at this point, I don't know if piecemeal would necessarily work because of the the force of the people that are standing against it. Dreamers should have been an easy pass because it had all the, it was a sexy issue. You had kids that were, high school students that, on honor rolls and everything, and they grew up in the United States. They've been here since they were 4 or 5 years old. It would seem that it would be hard to vote against the Dreamers, against the kids, and yet they did vote against it. So whether piecemeal legislation can be passed when the most, I don't want to say sexy, but the most attractive piecemeal legislation went down in flames is a good question.
Archbishop Wensky, I'm dying to ask you a question, and let me stay with the Archbishop for a second. How do you reconcile, one of the things that I find most frustrating is when a lot of the people that are hardliners on, not all of them, but a lot of the people that are hardliners on this immigration issue are self-proclaimed social conservatives and religious folks. And they, how do they take a position against the Dreamers? I mean, when you talk to fellow people of faith, how do you try to appeal to them, and how do you explain that to yourself, that people that are of faith would take a position against children that are here?
Well, again, one of the biggest advocates of the Dreamers and immigration reform has been people of faith. It's been the Catholic Church, and we've been pushing for it for a long time. So it's not fair to put all the religious people in one basket and say they're against immigration reform. The people.
I mean, members of Congress. That
Okay,
claim to be
okay.
People of faith.
Well,
Let me be
and
specific.
I say you can make a conservative argument in favor of immigration. A culturally conservative argument in favor of immigration. First of all, these immigrants are hard workers. They believe in the American dream. They have family values. They're conservative values. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're not lifestyle liberals as that the conservatives might criticize. So you can say that the immigrants are going to be good for a conservative point of view because, family values, hard work, American dream, and all that. So, but a lot of the people in the House think that they're all going to become Democrats, and that's why they're resisting to reform.
I was just going to go back to that question in terms of tactics and what to do differently. On the agriculture side, we've been a supporter of comprehensive reform when that's been what's been moving. We've been, seeking to move ag legislation on its own when that was the option that was there. I think the tactical question to some degree, it's going to be what the legislature wants to do, So I think that we have to be able to give space to that process. What is Speaker Ryan going to do? Assuming the Republicans still have control of the House, how is it going to be able to move through that body? I think that's been the real challenge that we've seen in this debate over the last number of years is getting something through the House that can be palatable to a majority of the members over there. I think on the political question, I think there's actually much more agreement on a lot of the issues than you would be led to believe by the debate that seems very polarized right now in the public mind. I think when you talk to members, when you talk to staff, I think you actually see much more in terms of a desire for a rational and reasonable solution. But a lot of that gets lost in the broader debate. A lot of that is not being exposed because that's not really a newsworthy item for folks to pick up on. But I think you see that in some of the reporting that we've seen after the efforts in 2013 and 14. There was actually a pretty strong effort in the House that I think was a lot closer to being something that was going to move forward than what a lot of people were aware of at the time. The politics at the time ended up kind of coming apart with some different events. But I think that there is opportunity there. And I think tactically we need to be able to give some flexibility to folks to be able to figure out how to get to a position where we see these things move forward.
Archbishop Wensky, let me ask you a follow-up. One of the leading figures in the anti-immigration crowd is Ann Coulter, and she makes the point that today's immigrant is different, you know, and I'm asking you since you've given a lot of historical perspective to this debate, and you've been advocating and working with immigrants for your entire life. Do you believe that there's, you know, that she's right, that at his or her core, the new immigrant is remarkably or substantially different than immigrants that were coming here 100 years ago or 50 years ago?
No, I think they're pretty much the same. And basically, what causes, people to migrate? People migrate because they're looking for the conditions worthy of human life for themselves or their families. And that was true 100 years ago. It's true this week of why people are trying to come to this country. So they've come for the same reasons. That doesn't mean everybody is every immigrant is a paloma blanca. Everyone is a white dove. And but the immense majority are coming for reasons to better themselves or better their families, altruistic reasons, if you will. People don't take this dangerous journey across Central America to come to the United States for a lark. They're coming. They're coming to basically to help their families, and they do that by getting a job and sending money back home. Let me give my little catechism lesson and do a little witnessing or evangelization, if you will, here in the University of Miami. But the Second Vatican Council, the bishops of the Second Vatican Council said that a human person will only be happy to the extent that he or she can make a gift of themselves to another. It's the theology of the gift. If you want to be happy, give of yourselves. The immigrants are not coming for themselves. They're coming as a gift to others, to their children, to their spouses, to their families back home. It's the theology of the gift, and that you can read. You can read immigrant stories from 100 years ago, and you can read them in the paper in last week's paper, and you find that same thread running right through it. So I don't think the immigrants have changed. And I don't think necessarily that the reception has changed either. It's been rough 100 years ago, it's rough today. But, that's why people of goodwill are trying to do something. And again, a year ago this month, a year ago last week, Pope Francis talked to the joint session of Congress, and he talked a little bit about immigration reform. He talked a little about world peace and everything, but he ended up with a great line. He said, remember the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that's really what should be the clinching argument of any debate. What's the golden rule here? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
I just want to say briefly on this. My ancestors are from Eastern Europe. They came at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And the stories that I've heard, of that experience, it wasn't a lot different than the stories you hear about the response to immigrants today. So I'm sympathetic from just a personal vantage point seeing that. And I think what we've seen in America for years, for decades, for centuries, is that if you've been here, you're going to respond against a new person, I think, in a sometimes negative way. And whether that was, Eastern Europeans in the early 1900s that were not welcomed with open arms. There was not a welcome mat saying, thank you for coming to work in, lower end jobs that are really difficult that we don't want to do. There was a negative response often. I think you see the same thing happening today. Why is that? I don't have, an answer to why we as a people respond that way often, but I don't think it's a new dynamic that we're seeing today. I think we've seen this for many years throughout our history, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and I just wanted to we spoke about this a little while ago about truth, right? I mean, you have select few that say ridiculous comments such as, they're coming here to murder and commit crimes and so on and so forth, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because if you look at, as was just mentioned, the trek to make it to this country and the reasons why they make this trek of risking their lives and their families' lives, it's not to go hang out at the beach at the Fontainebleau, by the poolside over there. It's to work, contribute, and to be able to feed their families and provide a better life. And I think that's the message that's just, unfortunately, just getting lost in all of this.
That's the story of my father and mother, yes. I think we have time for one last question, and then we're going to break before the second panel. Yes, ma'am. You get the last question here.
Thank you. I was just wondering, like the employees or industry, what can they do to integrate the immigrants, like provide English classes, or what can they do?
So her question is, what can employers do to integrate immigrants? Perhaps, Ken, you can talk about things that the Western growers, some of the best practices that you've seen some of the growers do?
Yes, I mean, there's been a number of things done. A number of our growers have done in various communities. I'm happy to talk about more of those things with you offline as well. But I mean, there's been opportunities that they do in terms of healthcare, setting up clinics for the families of these workers, providing opportunities for people to learn English. There's investments made in local communities, both in terms of education and integration in some of those other ways for the families of these people. So I think that there's a lot of things being done across the board to see local communities brought up. That's not a broader necessarily policy thing that a grower's doing, but each of them wants to see not just their own operation flourish economically, they want to see the community that they're in flourish as well. And so a lot of them are taking steps to try to see that immigrants are going to have opportunities, scholarships for children of their workers, many things like that I think people are trying to pursue.
I'll just touch on something. Here in Florida, we have what we call our corporate, our Step Up for Students corporate income tax scholarship program, and it's right now it's serving almost 90,000 low-income kids. Basically, if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, you qualify for this scholarship, and the scholarship is just simply a scholarship to attend a better school of your choice. And this is, I think the latest numbers is somewhere up in $200 million worth of corporate contributions that are going into this program. So that's probably a good example. That's being duplicated throughout the country as well.
Yeah, education is a great integrator, and Step Up is giving an opportunity for a good education for thousands of low-income kids, and a lot of them in our Catholic schools. But as far as integration, I think people integrate from a position of strength. A position of strength. If people do not have that position of strength, they remain marginalized and excluded. So the main way that immigrants can immigrate, is legal status, because that will afford them a position of strength for them to, again, integrate, whether it be, through unions or other things, that has given different immigrant groups or worker groups at different times that position of strength that has enabled their integration. But, look at the historic black colleges. They gave generations of African Americans a position of strength, namely education, that enabled their future integration. Without that position of strength, you have marginalization and exclusion. Marginalized people don't integrate. They stay on the margins, and they stay outsiders. Legal status is how you bring people into the system, make them part of the system, and integration takes place quite naturally, especially in this country, because you don't have to worry about the immigrant kids becoming Americanized, because in Peru or in Argentina or in Bolivia or in Kinshasa, Congo, the kids there are becoming Americanized even when they don't even leave the country, because of the force of the media and the TV and the movies, et cetera, et cetera. So in this country, they're going to become American, whether you want them to or not. You know, they're going to become American. But integration means legal status, or else they'll be on the outside looking in.
Thank you. You had a quick comment?
Just a quick comment. I cannot let this moment pass without mentioning that, to answer your question, the National Immigration Forum has me on the ground here in Miami, working with them to help in a program called the New American Workforce. And we are available for employers to help your employees naturalize at the work site. It's work we've been doing for the past 4 years, and we've had great, wonderful success. We launched here at the University of Miami just last week. Hundreds of people got information sessions, and we'll soon be getting one-on-one appointments to fill out the N-400 and become U.S. citizens. So to your point, Archbishop Wensky, we're helping them naturalize. We have 500,000 people out of 8 million plus in the United States that are here in South Florida that are eligible to naturalize. And we are working very hard every day to help you. So if you are an employer, or if you know someone that could utilize our services, please see me afterwards.
And thank you for what you did with the University of Miami. I heard that was very well attended. All right, help me thank this first phenomenal panel. Archbishop Wensky, Ken Barbic from the Western Growers, and of course Julio Fuentes from the Chamber. We'll take a 5-minute break, and then the second panel will start.